and SEL research and research strategies into the classroom. So it's my pleasure to present Jen Perry and Susanna Halliday Miller. Thank you.
Thank you so much,
you.
Ron. We are really, really excited to be here. And I just have so enjoyed this run of 3 presentations with this group of such engaged folks. And I'm really excited to be joined today by Susanna. She and I work together very, very frequently around talking about how we internally think about whole learner and social and emotional learning, executive function, and what it looks like as we talk to teachers and sort of navigate between our products and the larger concepts in terms of integrating it into the daily, because we know and we believe, and those of you who have joined us in some of our other sessions know that integration rather than a set aside is really the way to go, because that creates sticky learning for kids. So I'm going to start the way that I often do, which is with some type of check-in with all of you. And we would really love it. One of the things that we know is that our language around emotions is really small, all of us, right? And some of the research that Brene Brown and Mark Brackett, who's from Yale University, have identified that most adults only have the ability to name 3 emotions when they're feeling them: happy, sad, and angry. And there's so much more and so many nuances. And so one of the things that we try to do is build vocabulary around that. So what I'd love for you today to do is just take a look at this mood meter, right? And if you could pop into chat words that speak to you and your current sort of emotional state. Now I'm going to tell you, while you're doing that, I was talking to a young man in my town in Rochester, New York. Cozy, I love that. The other day, and he had just experienced the loss of his friend through gun violence, and he's trying to bring a mental health program into his school. And I asked him how he felt, and he said frustrated. And we used this, and it really expanded his ability to articulate that he was feeling, anxious and apprehensive and frustrated and disappointed. And so there were all these words that came out beyond the initial one that helped us really brainstorm the kinds of things that he might need. So I see Susan says cozy. How about anybody else? Anybody else have a word that describes how they're feeling? Excited. Oh, Mona, I love that. Apparently I feel fulfilled. I'm guessing that's Maggie maybe joining us, and she feels fulfilled. Lively, optimistic, pleased, wonderful, focused. So the other thing that's really important that I'm going to talk about is that one of the reasons we do this at the beginning is it helps us as educators get a tenor for how well you're going to learn what we're presenting to you, right? Because if everybody wrote back a word that was in that red, orange, sort of blue category, that you were low energy and that you were really struggling, we would have to change our approach a little bit in order to help you really engage and learn. For folks who are enthusiastic and excited and calm, we can be a little bit more cheerleaders, and we can sort of just say, okay, we're ready to learn today. So that really helps us. Thank you, Yasmin. Uneasy. Yeah, I think there are a lot of us feeling uneasy right now for all sorts of reasons. Blanched. Wow, that is a word. I'd like to know more about that. Well, okay, so I'm going to keep us moving because I know we have a lot to cover and it's exciting. But thank you so much. I will say that it is important, if you do this with students, to not just do it as a tick box thing, but if you do start to get words, Susanna and I just ran a workshop for some adults the other day, and we did it with a weather map. And some people wrote like downpour, and we had to stop and say, tell us what's going on with your downpour. And there was just a mass shooting in Michigan in one of our schools, and some of those educators had been trying to interact with that school. And so we did have to pause and recalibrate. So it is important to use this as information, but I feel like we're doing pretty well today. Thanks, Mona, for the affirmation. So today for our agenda, we're going to discuss social and emotional learning with academic and life skills. We're going to talk a little bit about why connections matter. It'll just be a brief refresher. Most of you will have probably participated in one or the other of our past trainings, but we're just going to do a little bit of a level set. We're going to explore opportunities for integration between core content and social and emotional learning. And we're going to identify some research-based strategies for integration into classrooms. So if you have been in our trainings before, you've seen the slide around academic skills that we hope that our students have. In particular, these are skills that if you're in the IB curriculum, you'll definitely recognize them. But why we wanted to start here is because these are really nice crossover skills for places that, you know, social and emotional learning aligns with our idea of academic achievement, right? We want our students to be knowledgeable not only in the subject that we're teaching, but knowledgeable around big issues like equity and bias. And we just, as in Susanna's introduction, we talked about learning about other cultures and the importance of that in terms of our context. We want students to be thinkers, to be able to make ethical decisions, right? So this is the difference between a dependent learner who's just learning facts and churning them out for you versus someone who can put that into the mix and make their own decisions and separate fact from fiction and, you know, break down stereotypes and that kind of thing. We want kids to be risk takers. And we talked about this before, that sometimes when we focus on, oh, you got the right answer, and we keep moving rather than celebrating failure as a learning opportunity, right? Creating spaces for kids to recognize that curiosity can be more important than correctness sometimes, and that we need to really let kids take risk in learning. And that's true in terms of them sorting out their own beliefs. We want them to be good communicators, and good listeners, to be principled. They have to understand their own values, which means some self-reflection, some understanding in where they are. And we want them to be curious inquirers. And so today, what I want you to do is to look at this and think about the subjects that you're teaching as we go through this and we start to cultivate what can the mix of SEL and academic achievement look like together when you're in class and you're working through things. At the same time, I want to connect this to that whole learner strategy that we've talked about, right? So you see this tree here, and you know, one of the things we have to remember is that for kids to reach that canopy, that academic excellence and learning point, there's a lot that is feeding it, right? So the idea of meeting kids' basic needs, food, shelter, and safety in order to get them present and ready to learn. That cultivating relationships is one of the most essential things in increasing academic motivation, and that by including social and emotional learning into your academic content, you can really create robust relationships with kids in important ways. And I'm going to talk about what this might look like in a second. And Susanna's going to walk us through some of the ways that we interact with this in our learning. And then addressing that executive function and social and emotional learning level in order to really provide the grounding for academic thriving. And so you can see here the data that says that the more connected kids feel, this is from the Search Institute, the more connected they feel, the stronger their perception of developmental relationship to you, to their parents, to the environment, the better that they do academically. So I'm just moving through this level set a little bit. Does anybody, this should resonate with you. If you were in some of the other trainings, if you were not in some of the other trainings, we want you to just have a little bit of this background as we move into our learning today. So I'm going to just tell you a story, and then we're going to move into the logistics of integrating SEL into your academic subjects. So I recently presented in Chicago, and the theme was social and emotional learning more important than ever, right? And really thinking about how do we create a why for learning, right? I just read a study that said one of the challenges for kids learning today is they don't connect it. They don't have the why. Why do I need to know this? I mean, when I was growing up, we all asked that about math. But now, you know, kids really, they're looking at this world and technology and all of these things, and they're asking it about everything, right? And they may not be asking it directly, but it's certainly how they're behaving. So for me, when I was in school, I was the kid for whom relationships was everything. It mattered. When I had a teacher who connected to me, it created an environment where I felt safe and I could take risks. And we just saw that in one of the academic learner ones. If I didn't have connection, that engagement was more challenging. So I had two teachers in my life that really changed my life. And I want to tell you about them. But first, I also want you to begin thinking about this question. Think of the teacher in your life who made the greatest impact on you, right? Think of that and think about the qualities that they had, right? Did they make the greatest impact because they taught you the quadratic equation, or did they make the greatest impact because of something larger, right? So Hoda says she remembers their physics teacher. Yeah. What was it that you remember about that person? I'm going to give you a minute to put that into chat, and then I'll tell you my story.
Humanity.
Yeah, I love that. English teacher. What do you remember about them? Mohammed, he was too active. What does that mean? Tell me more about that. My math teacher. Yeah, okay. Someone who stood by you when you had a panic attack. They were compassionate. The only one. Strong personality, that they were passionate and bold, I imagine, right? Very, very exciting. Well, as you guys write that in, I'm going to tell you a little bit about why I picked these two teachers. So for me, Leon Bass was my history teacher. In fact, he was my US history teacher. And that's important in this case because in April of 1945, at 18 years old, Leon Bass entered Buchenwald concentration camp and liberated it. He was the first Black man that people had seen there. And it made an impression on his life that he carried with him everywhere he went. And he stayed connected to one of the gentlemen who was liberated. And so when I learned about US history, I learned about his lived experience. He also was a principal in inner city Philadelphia, and he experienced profound racism and lots of inequities that he had to process and used in teaching us about our history. That was really important to me. What he taught me was that lens matters, that his personal story could bring to life what I was learning in a way that really made it stick for me. And I knew that that was the kind of teacher that really worked. And then Pam McAmer, she passed away about a year ago from cancer, and she taught me math, and I was not a good math student. Later, she taught me European history, and I took European history for my life after that. I was really excited. But what Pam really taught me was that being passionate about your students and getting to know them and what they cared about, and like this person said about standing next to them when they were having a panic attack, but really cultivating what it took for me to learn that lower level helped me engage and learn how to do hard things. She taught me how to do hard things and that I was competent and could do that. Those were really important lessons. That's an example of people who, even not explicitly, just implicitly by the way that they behaved, taught us social and emotional learning through their academic subjects. And that was really, really important. So imagine what could happen if that happened intentionally. So I see lots of stories here. Paul or Susanna, are there any that you want to lift up for us?
I just appreciate people sharing that it's about connecting with students and caring about them both in and out of school, that really makes an impact, and treating their students as if they're their children.
Yeah, so that whole learner, sort of all the eco-cultural niche that we all exist in, our stories exist in a much broader way than just our classroom or our task. I love that concept. All right. Well, so, these are the kind of questions that we want to answer, and we want to answer them not as just a set aside or implicitly. We want to answer them formally. And so one of the ways that Edmentum has tried to give tools to teachers to help you integrate and talk about these things and really build skills, because I'm sure that all of you who are thinking of this exceptional teacher who changed your life can also think of teachers who maybe didn't. And there's a skill difference between people, and we do the best that we can. And so sometimes having some things that equalize our skills can really help. So today, as we talk about integrating SEL into our core learning, we're going to use references to our social and emotional learning curriculum-based education. It is a formal social and emotional learning curriculum that goes from first grade through 12th, so your primary all the way through the end. It impacts social and emotional skills for everyone. We actually have the ability to use it for adults too. We've used it in our setting to help upskill our adults and get a better understanding of ourselves and what we're bringing to the table and what we can teach other people. It supports a range of social and emotional learning implementations. So all the way from, integration in a classroom to kids who are really struggling and need something very specific and much more of an intervention framework. It navigates, it gives curriculum that can help navigate a changing world. So those 21st century skills that employers value, that we all do, that help build agility and adaptability. And there's lots and lots of options for courses, hundreds of courses. All right. And in addition, there's an assessment that goes along with it. And that's really important. And I'm going to loop us back to some of that research as we go in. And the assessment looks at kids standing in terms of their perception of how they're doing social and emotionally. So how do they feel about themselves academically? How do they feel about themselves in connection? Do they feel like they have challenges with behavior, and are they engaged in learning? And this is an assessment that comes up every 90 days. And we can certainly break down the product, but I just want you to have a little bit of background, because here's where we're going to go. And we go back to this understanding that connection matters in learning. This is some of our pilot data from baseline, right? And what we learned, the blue line is a student's first attempt, or the school's first attempt with baseline. And we see that students were low in social connectivity, and that as teachers cultivated that connection with students, their engagement increased and their sense of academic self-confidence increased. And this is really important because this matches national data that says connection matters, and the ways that we integrate and engage are really, really important. So my job today was to level set. Susanna's job today is going to be to talk about, how do we do this? How do we do this practically and integrate it into what our learning is? So I'm going to turn that over to Susanna. Thanks, Susanna.
Thanks, Jen, for setting that up for us and just sharing the stories of the teachers that had an impact on your life. I think it's really helpful to keep that mindset as we walk into maybe some of the details on how to integrate SEL into our classrooms. And as we get started, I just want to check in with you. I know that you've had the opportunity to be with Jen in a couple of other sessions around social and emotional learning. So where are you at in your journey to bring social and emotional learning into your classroom? I have a traffic light kind of as our symbol. So red is you have your foot on the brake, you're just getting started, and you're here to learn, and that's a great place to be. We're so grateful that you're here today. Yellow would be you have some experience, you're trying a few things, and you're kind of just getting started, you're moving slowly. And green is I'm good to go, Susanna, jump in the passenger seat because I'm driving. Where are you guys at? Are you a red? Are you a yellow? Or are you a green? Would you find the chat and just let us know? That'll really help kind of guide our conversation this evening. So red, yellow, green. Okay. Yellow, perfect.
Yep.
Good to know. Yeah, especially if you've been in some of the sessions with Jen already. Lovely. Couple more yellows. Okay, good.
All right. I think we're feeling pretty much right in the middle here. That's
great.
awesome.
You know, because as educators, I think that that's something that we bring to the table already is this care and compassion and concern for our students. And I see a green, so you can
Couple
help
of
me
them.
in the good, good, good. All right, so let's jump on in to our content. We thought that as we are talking about social emotional learning today, that it would be helpful just to have a framework. And so we're going to use CASEL 5 competent. Oh, let me pause. As we get started, I do want to introduce, there's 3 different ways I'm going to talk about integrating SEL, and they're all really wonderful ways. And so I just wanted to lay out the 3 options that we're going to look at. First of all, there are some classroom strategies, just ways of managing your classroom, managing your time, and introducing your subject matter that does help support SEL. And so that's a really great way to get started. If you're looking for those quick wins, right, is just implementing strategies that support SEL. The second option is really to embed social emotional learning into your core content. So finding ways to be intentional about making that connection for students, because that's what learning is. It's all about helping students make connections. And the third option is really embedding BASE, which is the tool that Jen mentioned before that we offer for our social emotional learning curriculum into your classroom. So those are the 3 ways that we're going to kind of look at today together. And in order to do that, I did want to just have a framework for us to use. So I'm going to base our conversation off of the Collaborative of Academic, Social, and Emotional Learning, CASEL, because they really have been leaders in this field for about 30 years, really. They defined SEL from the beginning, and they have our 5 competencies that really we are looking for students to develop. So that being self-awareness, self-management, responsible decision-making, relationship skills, and social awareness. So today we're not going to have the opportunity to talk about all 5, but we'll work through a couple of these as we consider how we can take a look at bringing them into our classroom. So if we look at self-management, it's really the abilities to manage one's emotions, thoughts, behaviors, and be able to effectively walk through different situations to achieve goals and aspirations, excuse me. So this includes students developing impulse control, stress management, self-discipline, motivation, goal setting, and organizational skills. So if we're thinking about how do we help our students develop self-management, one thing that we can do is as we are thinking about our teaching and learning that's happening in our classroom, is asking ourselves, as I go to teach this content area, how can I help students build skills and understanding around those things, around impulse control, goal setting, organizational skills, and healthy struggle with frustrated with the problem. I love that last bullet because I think that that's, at least my students really had a hard time being okay with their frustration when they didn't understand a problem. And so one example that I wanted to call out was in maths. Really, goal setting matters. The process at which you solve a problem matters. And so one way that you could connect maths to social and emotional learning is asking students to think about a time that they jumped into a problem without really learning all the facts or examining the problem fully. What happened? What steps did they take or should they take so that next time they can slow down and get that question right? So again, as you're planning your teaching and learning, you can really think about just making those small connections for students. So that's one way. We also called out in maths and geometry. Many problems require the analysis or construction of a diagram, the recognition of relationships within it. There's always a specific process to follow from a set of given conditions. So if you think about geometry, two of the courses and two kind of things that you could unpack with students would be that impulsive decision making and primary and secondary impacts of behavior. So those things on the right that you see are courses that we have in BASE that align, that you could make that connection. So this would be that opportunity to connect math to the content within BASE.
I wonder if there are any ahas like, oh, wow, I hadn't thought about this before. I popped something in to ask if we had some math teachers out there. I just love this example of decision making, right? And all of that. Oh, we're going to get to English. Don't you worry.
Yeah, we have a couple examples of English. Yes. But yeah, maths, I mean, I think it is helpful just when you are specific in making that connection for students. Wait a minute, in math, we have a specific set of rules we have to follow, a certain order in which we have to solve for problems. That is an important skill for students to connect in their social emotional learning as well.
Yeah, one of the ways Susanna and I have talked about it in geometry that you know, you have to know that an angle is correct. Like the right angle is delineated by the box in the corner, and if you don't see the box, it's not a right angle. And so, how do you collect information and make decisions and make sure you have the right decisions? That's something you can use, you know, in life.
Yes, decision making. The decisions don't stop, they only get more complicated. So helping students understand the process along the way and in the journey is helpful.
Yeah.
Yes, yeah, real world
that.
situations. Okay. Yeah, absolutely. So social awareness is another skill or competency that we're really looking for students to develop. And that, as you see on the screen, is the ability to take the perspective and empathize with others. So in addition to what you see on the screen, perspective taking, empathy, diversity, respect, it includes the capacity to feel compassion for others, and understanding that broader historical and social norms for behavior in different settings, right? That cross-cultural component, being aware of your setting and aware of others. And then also recognizing that school and community support is so important. And so as you're planning your lessons, can you think of these guiding questions? How could this lesson in math, or how could this lesson in history, or how could this lesson in English help my students promote the growth mindset? So saying that healthy struggle is important and that growing is important, knowing where you're at, but also knowing that you have the opportunity to grow and develop. Thinking and asking yourself, how could I help my students pause and use this lesson to explore other perspectives or identify other approaches and building empathy? And so the example that seems so obvious, but it doesn't always pop up in classrooms is in history or in social studies. When, if you want to pop that one up on the screen. Consider the following, like when you're looking at history, whose voice is left out of the perspective that you're reading, right? If you're reading a textbook, that's one perspective, and whose voice is left out, or who benefits from the perspective that's in the history textbook. What is the lasting impact of this historical, this piece of history? What's the impact on people today? So just pausing to give students the opportunity to consider that is helpful. So an example that I wanted to share with you guys is in world history, right? When we're exploring imperialism, when we're exploring World War I, pairing that with this thinking around restorative practice, again, that primary and secondary impact of behavior. What's the lasting impact on the people? All or nothing thinking. So again, those are courses that are in our base curriculum that you could tie your history, social studies to really deepen students' understanding of social and emotional learning.
I love that, Susanna. And I really love the all or nothing thinking thing, because all of history, like any history that you're learning about, has conflict at the root of it, right? And so this idea that conflict is often born of thinking that it's either this or that rather than a both and figuring out some of those different pieces about how we can think more broadly and negotiate different things can be applied in any place that you're learning, right? In our families, in our lives. So I just love this example.
To Jen's example of her teacher, that he was sharing his lived history, but helping our students make the connections to history to their current life and the impacts that are on their family or on their daily life. I see a lot of people talking about some issues in the Middle East and how that impacts students, and helping them make that connection to history helps them not only buy into their learning, but also to develop their own social and self-awareness, right?
Yeah,
So
and I
I
see
see.
Marwa and Jumana both talk about communication and teamwork, and thinking about how that's transferable into 21st century skills and employment, and how our learning of history can help with that through these different lenses. I love this.
Yeah, I really appreciate those examples, and you guys thinking about your own students. It's so important. That's the heart of why we're here today, is to impact your students in your classrooms. So one more opportunity for us to kind of think through some of the competencies we're hoping our students are developing through our teaching and learning. Really is about relationship skills. And so you can see the official definition on the screen, that it's all these abilities to establish and maintain healthy and supportive relationships to navigate life, really. And so a lot of us talked about the importance of teachers in our lives and how they cared about us. And so not only helping those build relationships with our students, but helping our students understand how they can build healthy relationships with others. And so one opportunity that you could think about as you are planning your lessons is just asking yourself, what information and communication skills are needed to have a positive resolution? And so this could also connect to students working together in collaborative ways in the classroom on curriculum, and making them think through their communication skills and how that impacts their work, how communication skills and key information impact the outcomes, and how am I practicing these. So really making your students pause and consider their own attempts at communication and the impact that has on their success in the classroom or outside of the classroom. So one of the connections we can make is to English. And when we're looking at literature, to ask our students, what skills do the characters have or not have? What skills are missing in their primary relationships in the story, right? In English, when we study literature, we're looking at the arc of the character. And so helping our students recognize how those characters develop and how that impacts the character's success and their relationships. Looking again at the communication style of the characters. I can think of stories I've read as a student that I would get so frustrated with the characters. They would frustrate me because of their lack of communication skills. I always wanted to tell them to use their words, So really pausing and helping your students think about the literature they're reading and the examples that they're seeing in literature. And then asking students to think about their own interactions. So a classic example that international schools use all over the world is Romeo and Juliet. Of course, there's so much there to unpack in terms of relationships, healthy communication. Again, that all or nothing thinking around the family tensions. You could also consider the cultural implications within family and learned behaviors, impulsive decision making, talking to adults, coping strategies. There's so much there to unpack. So this is just another opportunity or another way to really embed our curriculum with curriculum that you may already be teaching in the classroom. Can you guys see any connections to relationship skills, to your own, whether you're teaching maths, any of history, English, whatever courses you teach? How could you help students make that connection to relationship skills? I know I gave a really specific English example. Do you see any examples that you could give for relationship skills? Okay, so relational numbers and coordinate plane. There is a relationship and that goes up. I love that. Really helpful. And it can be as simple as pausing and making that connection and saying, we're talking about a relationship here. This reminds me of the relationships that we have in our own life and how there's a direct impact on how we communicate or how we act and how that impacts our relationships with others. So it can be as simple as just making that call out for our students.
Right. And I see Mona says, when we relate it to real life, we never forget it. I remember when I worked for a year before I went back to college, and I worked with students who had some behavioral challenges. And when I went back and took child development, I could almost write the name of kids in the corner. And so all of that information really stuck with me in really important ways because I had that experiential learning piece. I love it. Oh, some more, lots of math examples here. I was going to say, I
Yes.
popped it into chat. Think about a lesson that you're currently teaching, and some of these guiding questions that Susanna has shared with you, and how do you think, like, does it spark something in you that says, "Ooh, I could just like make this one tweak, and now I'm integrating this in a really conscious way that I hadn't thought about." That's really exciting.
Yeah, it's very exciting. I also see the call out for hands-on projects. Yes, those are really helpful, not only for the students to practice those SEL skills, but then to actually pause and reflect on the social and emotional learning that they've done and asking the students to say, how did that go? What was the challenge that your group faced? Why? What would you do differently to ensure that you are more successful? So
I love the
definitely.
pressure and force and how it affects the design of dams, and the fact that pressure and force on emotions and behavior is like, that to me is so exciting.
Absolutely. So we ran through just some examples. And again, we looked at 3 of the 5 competencies that Castle talks about when they're talking about social emotional learning. And we talked about 3 specific subject areas. But there really is a plethora or multitude of ways that you really could make connections to your teaching and learning that's happening right now in your classroom. And so we've put together a guide that we're going to make sure that gets shared out with you, that will walk you through, okay, if I am an English teacher and I'm looking at self-management, here are some questions I could ask myself or some ways I could integrate that. If I'm a math teacher, if I'm a science teacher, if I'm a social studies teacher, we really wanted to just give you a tool or a resource that'll help you pause and make those small possible shifts. So it'll just going to give you some essential questions as you're planning your lessons or as you're teaching your lessons. Some of us have been at teaching for a long time. It's kind of old hat to us, right? And so it's really just about pausing and embedding some new connections to our learning, perhaps. So we just wanted you to have the opportunity to explore some of those ideas. But I did mention that I wanted to also touch on some just instructional strategies in general that you could employ. So maybe those examples that we gave you kind of were overwhelming or you couldn't quite get there. I wanted to assure you that there are other ways that you can help your students build social emotional or learning skills in the classroom without having to be that specific to tying it to a base class or asking those questions. So the first thing you can do is really about asking your students questions that supports their authentic voice. So giving them the opportunity to share their stories, to be able to be honest about who they are and where they come from in their families and the impact that that's having on their learning. We started the session off this morning with checking in with you, and Jen shared how, that would need to impact our lesson for the day. So doing the same thing with your students, allowing them to share their authentic self with you. Somebody else called this out, so
Yeah.
well done. Use active hands-on learning techniques. That's really key in helping students develop social emotional learning. Using strengths-based language instead of a deficit mindset. We always think about these are the things that I need you to learn and you're not measuring up. People become, I know I have students that became very obsessed with grades, and instead of thinking about their growth and their development, it really became about, what they didn't know, that deficit. And so really helping that shift to a strengths-based mindset, strengths-based language within our classroom.
And someone popped that into chat around positive communication and those ideas. And we just had this conversation with an educator recently who was talking about cheating had gone up, and it was because there was such a premium on getting the answer correct all the time, and kids could now use Google and other things to figure things out. And I said, well, what if correct didn't matter anymore? What if the learning part was the thing we focused on? And then they could look it up and we could talk about, well, why? How did they get to that answer? And that's really that strength-based flip. I love that concept.
Yeah. also building a culture of problem solving and critical thinking. To Jen, your point about Google, when I was young and growing up, knowledge was power, right? You had to memorize facts and figures and demonstrate that on exams. Well, now, you can look and almost anything up on Google. And so it really is about not only learning the facts and figures, but also that critical thinking component. How do you think critically about the information that you've learned? How do you tackle problems and solve problems and do all of that in a healthy and effective way? Another really important component or strategy you can use in your school is to connect to the community. So finding ways to share this social and emotional learning with families, using a shared vocabulary, and really helping students, you've said it multiple times in the chat, connecting with their learning into their world is an important part. And then finally, we've talked about integrating SEL into your core learning. That really is a helpful way. And it can be, like we said, as simple as making that connection, pausing as you're solving that math problem or talking about your X and Y axis to talk about how relationships impact one another. And then also, last but not least, I wanted to call out the importance of connection. Jen started us off today to talk about the importance of connection, but research shows us that the most effective approaches are really embedding it into that core learning, but really helping students or connecting with students around social emotional learning multiple times throughout the week. And so we called out that 2 times a week. If you could be intentional about connecting SEL into the learning 2 times a week, it'll really have a profound impact on your students.
Yeah, and I was just talking this morning about this as a theme, sort of if you're doing one thing, one day you might talk about the problem solving, one day you might talk about how does it feel when you get stuck in problem solving. And you can sort of build on concepts that it doesn't have to be like this big overwhelming thing, but you're just really explicitly elevating it a couple times a week, because we know that in order to build new skills, we have to practice them multiple times to acquire them, right? So Susanna, you and I just put out a new resource for people to help them really think about integrating this in multiple different ways, from just a quick conversation to using an assessment and having a conversation about further learning, to really this full Romeo and Juliet embedded into class. Do you want to talk a little bit about our new guide?
Yeah, so another resource, it's hot off the presses. We just released it last week. It's something we've been working on for quite a few months, but we wanted to provide some really clear examples. Again, this webinar goes by so quickly and we talk through a lot of ideas. And so we wanted to walk people through step by step. How could you embed SEL into your classroom, specifically using BASE, but it really walks people through the different steps that it requires in order to make those connections, and how you plan for it, how you prepare for it, and how you help students really make those connections to social and emotional learning. And so this guide is for 6 through 12, grades 6 through 12, and it will give you a couple of examples how you can call it out explicitly through connecting it to your core curriculum, and how you might also, which is a whole group, right, with all of our students, or how you could make connections for individual students, because sometimes we have those opportunities to work with students one-on-one. And so there's also some information there. Again, how you plan and engage with students to really walk them through those connections. What would you add to that, Jen?
Yeah, no, I think that's great. I was just I was looking into chat here, and Dina says that one of her students is so obsessed with marks. And, we see this particularly in high achieving students, right? That they haven't for themselves necessarily defined what's important to them and the connection. It's about this external measure that they need to meet, and they're just always striving to meet it. And often those kids, when they go to college, have crisis around that. And so, it sounds like she breaks down whenever she gets a critique, because there's some perfectionism. I mean, there could be a million different things going on there, but it's really affecting her negatively. And I think, this is right. This happens a lot to kids. And I just talked to a kid who had a negative narrative in her head. She was telling herself how bad she was because when we asked her how she was doing, because she had just gotten progress notes that told her in uncertain terms that she didn't measure up. And so really it's about normalizing hard things and failure and sort of changing our approach to learning from prioritizing the right answer to all of these qualities that we've been talking about, critical thinking and actually celebrating when something's wrong, because it gives you the opportunity to learn why and how and in different ways. And it sounds like this young person could use some individual support in terms of talking about what her emotions are when that happens to her. Why is it that she's disappointed? Pinpointing that sense of anxiety and overwhelm. So thank you for lifting that up. I think you probably spoke to a universal experience for many people on this.
Yeah, I was going to say I had that experience with my students as well, right? Them just being obsessed with the missed mark and the missed score, and not on that growth mindset about what they need to learn still, or what they have learned and where they can go with that. So definitely a universal experience, and we don't want our students to be so overwhelmed and disappointed that they can't then learn in their other classes, in ours and in other classes as well.
For sure. Well, as always, you guys have been such a wonderful participatory audience. We want to make sure if you have any questions, we do have a couple minutes, and then I'm sure Paul and Ron want to wrap up. Is there any pressing question that maybe we missed? Thank you for your positive feedback. You guys are awesome. I hope, one of the things that happens in training, right, is we got, if you're like me, you go, oh, that's such a great idea. And then you walk out into your next task and you go, oh, what was that idea? Or how do I do that? So I want to push you just a little bit to say, like, think about one thing you learned today, maybe one guiding question, maybe it was self-management, maybe it was relationship skills, maybe it's how to integrate something in a particular way. And think about the lesson specifically that you are teaching now, and challenge yourself to find a way to do one of these things. And we're going to send you the slide deck so you'll have those prompts. But if you could do that and start to practice it, then maybe you'll feel like this stuck a little bit more for you. Thanks for the positive feedback.